Your attention is affected by the purpose of the listening situation, and it may be in a listening context that you have more than one purpose. However, I do want you to understand some of the differences between different listening purposes and how that may affect a given context, and then we'll talk about how you could adopt multiple purposes or aims or goals within that context. We'll begin first with appreciative listening. We all enjoy this because this is the type of listening that we do when we want to be entertained, when we want to enjoy ourselves. So when you sit down and you listen to one of your favorite artists and musicians and you really appreciate maybe their ability to play a certain instrument, their ability to write creatively and listen to the lyrics, or the way that everything just comes together and creates a sound that you enjoy, this is engaging in appreciative listening. What I find fascinating is that appreciative listening is linked to your creativity. And so therefore, when you expand your appreciative listening opportunities and you expose yourself to a variety of different things that you enjoy, whether it's sounds in nature, whether it's listening to stories that someone else tells, or even a comedic routine, then you're able to actually expand your own creativity. And so I would encourage everybody to really work on their appreciative listening. And many times we don't think of it as being a skill, but it's something that we can definitely cultivate and expand and enhance. The second type of listening purpose would be discriminative listening. Discriminative listening is when we're really focusing on verbal and nonverbal messages in order to notice specific details. So we're interested in specificity. For example, whenever I attend maybe a doctor's visit, especially with my husband, and it's about his health, I tell you what, I am concerned about exactly what the diagnosis is, all the specific aspects of treatment that they want to provide, and I'm writing it down because I want to be able to recall it, but I'm really mainly interested in getting all the details, understanding what each word means, what each word actually is, especially in a medical context, because sometimes they say terms I have never heard before. So we're really focused on detail and discriminative listening. Thirdly, we have comprehensive listening. This is where you're really overall just trying to learn, soak it up, understand something more fully, and you do want to be able to recall that information later. The classroom is sort of the classic illustration and example of comprehensive listening, where you're trying to understand concepts that are being covered and discussed so that you're able to recall them later on a test and make applications. But if you think about it, you really engage in comprehensive listening in a variety of different situations, not just the classroom. I know in the workplace, I attend different trainings and seminars, and I go to conferences and I attend panels that spotlight different research that's being conducted. And so I use comprehensive listening probably more so than any of the other types of listening. You have next critical evaluative listening, which is where you are focusing on messages so that you can make a judgment about the information. Notice I did not say make a judgment about the other person because that will inhibit your listening skills. But it's giving the message a fair share. That's listening to the entire message and then trying to assess the credibility of the information that you just heard, the applicability of the information that you just heard. So it's an evaluation of the content of the message, not who delivered it, okay? Empathic communication is related to showing sympathy and empathy for others. That is demonstrating our concern. We use empathic communication when another person comes to us. Maybe they're confiding in a problem that they have. They want us to see a different point of view. And we're going to talk more about empathy as we discuss support. But this is very important in terms of friendships and family relationships and even building closer relationships with coworkers. Empathy can be very important, and there are a number of professions that really focus on developing empathic listening skills. For example, counseling, teaching, sales, all those have to have good empathic listening skills, because when people come to you with problems, you have to be able to listen effectively in order to help them to be able to overcome them. And then finally, I added in another type of listening that is not talked about in your textbook. And it's kind of disappointing, but there's some research coming out about dialogic listening. And dialogic listening is when two people, rather than coming to the listening situation, especially when the other person desires empathy from you, instead of coming to that situation with thinking, okay, I have to be so other-centered, I can't think about myself, I can't focus on myself in this, I just have to focus on the other person, it's almost like you lose your identity in that situation. But in dialogic listening, though, it's not a focus on the other person, and it's not a focus on yourself, but it's a focus on the relationship. And within that given moment, within that listening context, making meaning together. It's sort of like the illustration of sitting down at a potter's wheel with another person and trying to create or mold that clay together rather than watching somebody else mold it. So you're creating meaning together. And so within dialogic listening, rather than just listening to the other person go on and on and on, when it's your turn within turn taking, what you would do is you would offer up alternative perspectives. You would offer up maybe metaphors for what they're going through to help them better understand it and see it in a different light, and they would come back and they would counter that, and you would have an exchange and a give and take, and it would be about the relationship, and it wouldn't be focused on one or the other persons involved in the conversation. The next step, well, before we get to the next step in listening, there is a debate, I think, and that is whether or not in face-to-face communication especially, it is actually possible to completely shift from speaker to listener. Your book talks about making the shift from speaker to listener completely. However, if you're in a face-to-face encounter, you already know that as you're providing nonverbal feedback, that is a form of speaking, even though you're not maybe verbalizing something orally to the other individual. So do you really ever make a shift completely from speaker to listener? And if you're not really doing that, if you're not shifting from one role to another, but you are simultaneously invoking both the role of speaker and listener, then how might we better label these roles, right, or conceptualize what our roles are? And a lot of textbooks, what they do is rather than labeling you speaker and listener, they just label you communicator. And you understand that in order to be a better communicator, you're going to have to learn how to be both an effective speaker and an effective listener. And that's what we're doing right now. We're focusing on being an effective listener. There are a number of things that impact our willingness to attend to a message, our willingness to listen. One, our interest. What do we like? What do we want to know more about? What grabs our attention and really helps us to focus? And if you were to go to something like a news website, what area of the news are you going to gravitate towards first? Well, the same thing in conversation or in a lecture classroom, whatever interests you, whatever catches your attention first in terms of interest usually is what you focus on. But you may have a certain goal that you want to achieve and you listen in order to achieve that goal. Or maybe you have a need. You have a need to understand one aspect of the message better than the other, and that need is going to help you to focus within that given situation. We have a number of things that impact our willingness to listen. There is actually a self-test that tests for willingness to listen. I put that on this week's module, so I encourage you to take that test and to see how willing you are to listen to people that maybe you don't find interesting, or to a speaker that speaks monotone, or in a situation where you have a lot of emotional baggage that you're bringing to it and so you're very distracted. Go ahead and take that willingness to listen measure. I think it's eye-opening whenever you get the results back. Understanding and interpreting are the next stage in the listening process. So after we've attended to a message, then we seek to understand it and to interpret it. To understand is to accurately decode a message so that you can share its meaning with the speaker. However, is it possible for us to do this? Is it possible for us to always know where the other person is coming from completely and accurately? Well, many people disagree that you really can't know completely where another person's coming from because you don't know their entire life circumstances, you don't have their same experiences, you even maybe have a different vocabulary than they do in some cases, or you use words in different ways. Remember, word connotation has a big impact on meaning. So what's advocated many times is that we approximate meaning. It's an alternative approach to accuracy. It helps us to basically reframe the way we think about accuracy. So rather than using the word accuracy, most of the time we're going to replace that with approximation. That is approximating meaning. That is trying to get as close as we can to understanding a message as it is intended by the speaker. But complete accuracy, many people say, is really an illusion. Approximating meaning assumes that accuracy is basically an unrealistic goal when we're interpreting. And then approximating meaning is going to help us to acknowledge these inaccuracies, but it emphasizes the effort that we're going to have to make as a listener in order to understand others, because that means that we really have to place ourselves in the other person's circumstances as much as we can. We have to ask questions, we have to show an interest, we have to really get to what they're trying to communicate to us. And so it really places an emphasis on what the listener has to do in that process. And so when we think about approximating meaning, that dialogic approach to listening that I talked about earlier, where we create meanings together as a joint process, becomes, I think, emphasized quite a bit more in terms of being able to be a better approximator of meaning.